والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله. Hi everyone. So I'm gonna give my lecture in English, but probably in between I'll explain something in Farsi. If I can put it in English, good enough, or if there is a question, we can shift to Farsi and back to English. Okay, so I'm gonna talk for 40 minutes, inshallah, and then we'll have questions and answers. So the title is Kalam Cosmological Arguments. Let me explain briefly about some of the terms here. So cosmological argument is not the name of only one argument. It's actually a group of arguments. So we have multiple cosmological arguments. They're called cosmological because they argue from some property of the cosmos to the existence of God. For example, one version of cosmological arguments argues from the contingency of the cosmos to the existence of a necessary being, which is supposed to be God. Or another version of cosmological argument argues from the order that there is in the cosmos to prove the existence of an intelligent designer. So any argument that argues from some property of the cosmos as a whole for the existence of God is called cosmological argument. And that's why they're called cosmological arguments. So one of the cosmological arguments has been named Kalam Cosmological Arguments. So before we go in, we discussed the argument. Let's talk a bit about the origin of this argument. So this argument has been called Kalam Cosmological Argument because it originated in Islamic Kalam tradition. So Kalam in Islamic tradition was an indigenous discipline or tradition that developed among Muslims from very early, almost as early as first century Islamic calendar. And I said it's indigenous because unlike Islamic philosophy, which started with the translation movement when Hellenistic philosophy was introduced into the Islamic world, and then philosophers such as Al-Farabi and Avicenna integrated Hellenistic philosophy in the Islamic framework, the Islamic worldview. Kalam theology was native to the Islamic world. So from very beginning, because of some political reasons, certain theological and moral issues arise, and Muslim thinkers started thinking about those questions. For example, the nature of faith, what's the status of someone who gets in war with the caliph, what's the nature of afterlife, what's the nature of Quran, is it hadith, is it qadim? So because of certain questions that arose from within the Islamic world, this Kalam tradition developed. And they were first sort of competitor with the philosophers. I mean, it developed in parallel with Islamic philosophy, but then there were interactions between one another, and in later centuries, actually, they were integrated in at least some philosophers. Like Khaja Nasir at-Tusi. So anyway, this was Kalam. And this argument has been named Kalam Cosmological Argument because it was developed, at least in the form that we know nowadays, started in Kalam tradition. So the most prominent Kalam theologian who formulated this argument was Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali, the famous Ash'arite theologian So he lived in 11th and early 12th centuries, Gregorian calendar. He was the first Kalam theologian to formulate the argument very clearly, even though before him, the idea was there. I mean, we see the idea not in the mature form in Kendi or even before him, before Islam. And then after Al-Ghazali, many other Kalam theologians took the argument from Al-Ghazali, reformulated it into different forms. And so for your reference, Al-Ghazali formulated the argument in his Kitab Al-Iqtisad fi al-I'tiqad, and the page number is there for your reference. Okay. But in the contemporary time, this argument was revived by this philosopher of religion, William Lane Craig. So he's Christian philosopher, but he was good enough to give the credit to Kalam theology, and he called it Kalam Cosmological argument. So he started the argument in the 80s, actually in 1979 with his first book, but he has worked on the argument all these years until, as you can see, even 2018. So he has published 10 papers and books about this argument. Many of the papers have been actual responses to objections that have been raised against the argument. So it has been developed through these years by him. And he's alive. He's an alive philosopher of religion, and he's very famous. He has done very other important works in the philosophy of religion. And if I wanna tell you a bit about how hot the topic is, so I did a quick search and found out that in the last decade or so, 40 academic papers and 11 academic books were published specifically on this topic. I mean, the title is Kalam Cosmological Argument or something like that. And as you know, publishing academic papers and books in philosophy is not an easy job. People can publish in good philosophy journals a lot less than other fields. I mean, oftentimes some philosophy faculty publish only once a year and can keep their job. So it shows how hot the topic is. And that's in addition to many book chapters that has been dedicated to this topic. So there are many anthologies, many books, totally not about this topic, but one chapter is dedicated to this topic. And it's in addition to many sections in papers that has been dedicated to this topic. And all of them are academic works. So all of them are besides non-academic pop sources that discuss this argument, like philosophy blogs, religious blogs. People talk about the argument. So here's what an atheist says about this argument. He says, account of the articles in the philosophy journals shows that more articles have been published about Craig's defense of the Kalam argument than have been published about any other philosopher's contemporary formulation of an argument for God's existence. So what he says is that, so there was just some background information about the origin of the argument and that it's really a live topic and people in philosophy of religion are presently working on it. So what is the argument itself? Here's the argument. it has it has 3 premises with 2 conclusions, 1 conclusion, intermediate conclusion, and 1 final conclusion. So premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Nothing can come into existence without a cause. So this is usually called the causal principle, even though different authors mean different things by causal principle. So, I mean, whenever we say causal principle, we should note what we mean by this term. In this discussion, by the causal principle, we mean this statement that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. And to begin to exist is clear. So it means something that has not been there, but start to exist at some point of time, begins to exist, needs a cause. So as Craig sometimes puts it, nothing just pops into existence without any cause. This is what the causal principle says. The second premise says the universe began to exist. So there was a time that it didn't exist, and then it started to exist. So by modest ponens, we can infer logically from 1 and 2 that the universe has a cause of its existence. Right, so premise 1 says that everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, so the universe has a cause of its existence. So far, if the argument is successful, it has established that something that is not part of the universe, something that is not natural, has caused the universe to exist. Why is that? Because everything that is natural is part of the universe, right? And the whole universe started to exist. So the cause must be something outside the universe. Nothing can cause itself, right? So far, if the argument is successful, it has established that something that is distinct from the universe, that is not natural, is supernatural, caused the universe to exist. But so far, it doesn't rule out that the cause might have been some entity that had no volition, no awareness, and no free will, and worked in a mechanical way, and was governed by some laws, right? So actually, there are people who believe that the universe was caused by such an entity. They're called deists. The theory is called deism, as opposed to theism. And so the difference between a deity and God, the God of religions, is that a deity is an entity that is impersonal, in the sense that it doesn't have any knowledge, it doesn't have any volition. It works in a mechanical way, just like natural factors, right? So it's just not physical. It's outside the physical universe, but it doesn't act out of volition with free will. It acts in a mechanical way. So to rule out that possibility, we need the next premise, which says that only a personal agent, not a mechanical cause, not a mechanistic cause, is able to select when to cause the universe. So according to premise 2, the universe started to exist at a certain point of time, before which it didn't exist, right? What explains why it didn't exist earlier or later, just exactly at the time that it started to exist? Premise 4 says that only a personal agent who has volition, who can decide when to bring about the universe, can select the time when to create the universe. So we need premise 4 to rule out deism. Sure.
Do they use the term, like the argument uses the word time?
That's a very excellent point. This is one of the possible objections that we have to address later. So you're suggesting that if the universe started at Big Bang, for example, there was no time before Big Bang, before the beginning of the universe, because only at that time, time, space, laws of nature, everything, matter came into existence. So it doesn't really make sense why it didn't come into existence at an earlier time. If that's your point, then that's a valid point, and Craig will address that. We will see how he addresses this point in next slides. Very briefly, he says that even though there was no time in the physical sense before the universe, but in a broader sense, we could say that there was an interval between eternity and Big Bang. This interval could be shorter or longer, right? Why the interval was only that length? Why the cause of the world didn't create the world from eternity? So the cause must be some agent who has the power to decide, to select the interval, which interval to fall between eternity and the beginning of the universe, right? So that's why we need an agent that has free will and acts out of volition. So, yeah, if there is more question, we can discuss it. So we can logically infer that the cause of the universe is a personal agent, which is now a lot more closer to the God of Abrahamic religions. So it's not anymore a deity or, I don't know, some non-living, mechanically working entity that caused the world. It must have been something very close, very similar to God of religions.
So maybe we get to this later, but why we have to accept premise 4?
So, yeah, that's what I'm going to say. Premise 3, which actually is an intermediary conclusion, logically follows from the first two. So there is no question about that. Number 5, the final conclusion, also follows from previous statements. So all the discussion and debates focus on the truth of 1, 2, and 4. So we have to see what support Craig has for these previous statements and what critics say object to this theory. So yeah, the rest of the discussion will be what justification we have for the causal principle. Why should we accept it? Why should we believe that the universe began to exist? It was not eternal. And why should we believe that only a personal agent can decide when to start the universe? Okay, let's start with the causal principle, which says that everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. So nothing, it says that actually nothing pops into existence without any cause. So Craig argues that the principle is actually self-evident, and so doesn't need any argument. He says that no one sincerely believes that things, say a horse or an Eskimo village, can just pop into being without a cause. You just need to think a bit about the content of the statement and see that it's true. Actually, that's what we all assume every day. If there is a very loud sound in the neighborhood, you don't just say that, okay, it might have come into existence without any cause. And just you look for its cause. What caused the sound? Or if there is, I mean, any event that happens in our everyday life, every new thing that you see, we don't think that it might have popped into existence without any cause. We ask what caused it, what was its cause. I mean, that's something that everyone take for granted, right? It's one of the basic assumptions of our everyday life. And that's actually the underlying principle of the whole science. Why do we look for causes of natural phenomena? Why can't just we assume that they just happen for no reason? Why, if there is a new disease, why don't we say that, okay, it might have started to exist without any cause, nothing caused it. If we assume, if you think that way, science would not move on, right? Would not develop. So the whole scientific enterprise is based on such an assumption. And it's the whole motivation for trying to find causes of natural events for everything that we see and we don't know why it's there. So that's the claim. That's the claim that Craig makes. It's a self-evident truth. No one can sincerely doubt it. You might say, well, I accept it. But once you leave the meeting, you just organize your life on the basis of this principle. And you would not be content with, I mean, when encountering any new thing, any new object, new event, you would not be content with the possibility that maybe it just popped into existence without any cause. At least no scientific-minded person would do that. So even though it's self-evident, one might raise an inductive argument in its favor. And by inductive argument, we mean arguments that argue from specific cases to a universal claim, right? So for example, we see this new event and we see that it was caused. It had a cause for its existence. We see another event and we see that it was also caused by something. We see a third event and it was caused by something. So everything that we have seen that began to exist had a cause. So we can inductively conclude that everything that comes into existence has a cause for its existence. So that's an inductive argument. So unlike deductive arguments, inductive arguments do not establish their conclusion with 100%. They're just probabilistic arguments, right? Just raise the probability of the conclusion. But given that the number of cases that we have observed where something came into existence and was caused, it's so large, it's so many. The argument is actually quite strong. I mean, the probability of the conclusion is quite high. So one can raise an inductive argument in this way for this causal principle as well. I see some unconvinced faces. So if there is a question, we can open up for discussion right now. But anyway, so some of your concerns might be voiced in this slide. Here's something that some people have said against the claim that Craig makes. Some people have said that the principle is true about ordinary events, but the beginning of the universe, Big Bang, is not an ordinary event, right? I mean, it is so different from ordinary events that we can't just extrapolate what we know from ordinary events about that special event. And it actually weakens the inductive argument too. The objection says that the inductive argument has been based on ordinary events, all things that we have observed that came to existence and was caused by something, or just the ordinary events around us. And you can't really infer that Big Bang also was caused. So this might be a concern that bothers some of you. So the response that can be given to this objection is that for this objection to work, the critic must show what is the relevant difference between Big Bang and ordinary events. What is the difference in virtue of which ordinary events that come into existence have a cause, but Big Bang might not have a cause? There seems to be no relevant difference between them. In both cases, as long as existence, causation, coming into existence, all of these are concerned, both seem the same. In both cases, something began to exist that might not have begun to exist. Why do we think that if an ordinary event that comes into existence which didn't exist yesterday needs a cause, was caused by something to exist? Because it might not have existed, might not have begun to exist, right? That's the reason. So the same applies to Big Bang. Big Bang, again, is another event that might not have begun to exist, rather than began to exist.
So is this argument, do you believe that God has begun to exist? Or I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, so why can't we ask the same question about God? Because God is not something that began to exist. At least that's the conception of God that we are arguing for. We are arguing for an entity that had no beginning, no temporal beginning in its existence. Yes, if God came to exist at some point, it's also governed by this principle. This principle would apply to God as well. But by definition, the principle doesn't apply to God. Arguments say whatever that comes into existence was caused by something. Did God begin to exist? Did at least the God that Craig tries to argue for is not such a thing. And that's exactly the point. He wanna argue that we need a cause that didn't begin to exist. Otherwise, it would need another cause. Right? You might say that I don't believe in God, but if there were such a thing, the principle would not have applied to it. At least we can agree on this, right? So
You are affirming the premise that if this type of argument works for someone who believes in this type of God.
No. Actually, we wanna provide justification for believing in God. So we have not assumed that God exists. All our assumptions are these premises. First, everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. If there is a problem with the principle, we can discuss it. But we have not assumed the existence of God. Nothing about God is mentioned here, right? So we'll discuss the rest of the premises, but about the first principle, nothing is assumed about God yet. It's just a principle. Everything that begins to exist is caused to exist. And there is no difference between ordinary events and Big Bang with respect to this principle. Because both of them, as long as existence, coming to existence, needs for a cause, these are concerned, both are the same. You have to show that they're different in a relevant respect, so you can exclude its application to to the Big Bang. Yeah. Okay. So that's one reason. I mean, that was one objection and the response. But the objector would not sit back. He would come up with actual counterexamples to the principle. And the purported counterexamples come from quantum mechanics. So some has said that, okay, let's first talk about quantum mechanics. I'm no expert in this field, so what I say is just very general things about quantum mechanics that everyone, almost everyone knows. Just to remind us of these general truths. So at the quantum level, we have particles, right? There are particles like electrons. And the basic properties of particles are mass, weight, and spin, right? These are the three basic properties of particles. And the thing is that, let's suppose that there are three particles, electron 1, electron 2, and electron 3, and they have their own spin, weights, and masses. And what happens is that these states doesn't determine the next. Let me not use determine here. You can't predict what's going to be the next state. So given the states of this quantum, let's say, field or system, whatever here, the next state of this field or of this system cannot be predicted with 100% certainty. The most that scientists can do, is to show with what probability what will happen. So the current state makes the next state only probable. With probability, for example, 80%, there will be electron 1 and 3 with such and such mass, position, spin, and so on and so forth. So some people see an element of chance here. So things happen at that level just by chance, not by being caused. So some people have understood this phenomenon as a violation of the causal principle. And we have Smith, for example, an atheist, one of the critics of Craig's argument, saying that, here's what he says, quantum mechanical considerations show that the causal proposition, by causal proposition, he means the causal principle, the statement that we call the causal principle, is limited in its application. So he's saying that it's not applied to quantum phenomena, if applicable at all. And consequently that a probabilistic argument for a cause of the Big Bang can't go through. So what he says that even if we want to make an inductive argument that the Big Bang was caused, just the inductive argument I said, it would not be a good probability argument because we see that there are cases that doesn't follow the principle. So we have counter examples. So this is one example of someone who has taken quantum mechanics as a counter example to the causal principle. So a couple of things about this. Is it clear how people try to use quantum phenomenon as a, yeah. Okay, a couple of things can be said here. First, the objective indeterminacy of quantum phenomena is only one interpretation of quantum mechanics. So that objection is based on the interpretation of quantum mechanics, according to which the indeterminacy that we see there is in the world. The world is actually indeterminate. The next state of the quantum system is, in fact, not determined. And so quantum events are not caused. But that's just one interpretation. Another interpretation is that the indeterminacy is in our knowledge. So it's an epistemic indeterminacy, not an objective indeterminacy. It's famous that Einstein himself had the latter interpretation. So according to the latter interpretation, from God's point of view, quantum phenomena are determined. From our perspective, in our current state of knowledge, we can't predict it. So that's one thing that could be said. And if the latter interpretation is true, then quantum phenomena is not a counterexample to the causal principle, right? The second response that can be given is that even if the indeterminacy is in the world, quantum phenomena do have causes. Only their causes are not necessitating causes. I mean, the response here is that the objection misunderstands the quantum mechanics. It's not that quantum events are not caused. So the next state is caused by the earlier state. The thing is that it's not necessitated. It's not determined by the earlier state. So instead of saying that we don't have a causal relation there, we have to say that we have a new type of causal relation. We have a probabilistic causal relation. In this relation, the effect is still caused, but is not necessitated by cause. I mean, it might have failed to follow, but when it follows, it was caused, right? And so there is nothing that comes to existence, even the quantum phenomena, that does not have a cause. Some things that come into existence might have causes that don't determine them, that might have failed to produce them. But it doesn't mean that when they produce them, when the effect is there, the effect was not caused. Okay, that's for the first principle, which was the causal principle. We can make a pause here and see if there are questions.
15 minutes only, so then we continue next week.
Okay, so it's enough for this session? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. It's being recorded now. So I think that's enough for this session. We can continue the discussion in next sessions. And that was only the first principle, the causal principle that we discussed. We'll discuss the other premises of the argument in next sessions. Thank you so much for your attention.
من فقط بکنم یا نه؟ من نمیم چرا رو زبط کنشم؟ نه